The old man of Copper Ridge always said some stories sound like lies even when they happen right in front of you. On a cold October morning, ranch hand Dylan Cross learned how true that was when he stepped into the trees behind the Whitmore Ranch and found something that would change his life forever. What he saw that day was so shocking, so cruel, and so full of quiet hope that it would soon ripple through an entire town. A pale mist covered the land like a heavy blanket as Dylan walked the fence line just after sunrise. Frost clung to the dry grass, and the air bit through his worn denim jacket. At 38, Dylan looked older than his years. His hands were rough, his back stiff, and his green eyes carried the weight of too many hard seasons. Life had never been gentle with him, and Copper Ridge was the first place that had felt even close to home in a long time. The Whitmore Ranch was falling apart. The fences leaned, the barn boards were cracked, and the pastures were thin. But old Benjamin Whitmore had given Dylan work and a small cabin when no one else would. In return, Dylan gave the ranch everything he had: long days, quiet nights, and no questions asked. That morning should have been like any other. Walk the fence. Fix broken wire. Keep busy so the past stays quiet. Dylan carried his grandfather's old toolbox and moved slow and steady, the way a man learns to move when mistakes cost money and pain. Then he heard it. At first it sounded like wind moving through the trees. Low, uneven, wrong. Dylan stopped and listened. The sound came again, deeper this time. It was breathing. Heavy and broken, the kind of sound that comes from something large and suffering. His stomach tightened as he followed the noise into the trees beyond the fence. Leaves cracked under his boots. With every step, the sound grew clearer. Metal scraped softly against wood. Dylan pushed through a line of bushes and stepped into a small clearing. An ancient oak tree stood at the center, wide and weathered, older than the town itself. At its base lay a horse so large, it barely looked real. The animal's coat was black as night, but dull and thin, its ribs pressed hard against its skin. Thick iron chains wrapped around its neck and chest, biting deep into raw flesh. Blood and dirt stained the hair where the metal had rubbed. The horse lay on its side, breathing in short, painful bursts, one massive hoof scraping weakly at the ground. Dylan felt his chest lock up. He had seen injured animals before. He had never seen cruelty like this. As he stepped closer, he noticed a folded piece of paper tied to the chain near the horse's neck. His hands shook as he untied it and opened it. His name is Goliath. I can't feed him anymore. He's too big, too wild. Maybe someone else can save him. I'm sorry. There was no name, just faint water stains soaking the paper. Dylan looked back at the horse. Goliath lifted his head slightly. His eyes were a deep amber, clear and aware despite the pain. When they met Dylan's gaze, something passed between them. Not fear. Not anger. A question. Dylan swallowed hard. He had no money, no horse experience, barely enough food for himself. The smart thing would be to call the sheriff and walk away. Let the system decide what to do. Instead, Dylan knelt in the cold dirt and placed a hand near the horse's face. I'm not leaving you here, he said quietly. I don't know how, but I won't. Goliath's ear flicked. His breathing slowed just a little. Dylan ran back to his cabin and returned with every tool he owned. Bolt cutters, a hacksaw, a pry bar. The chains were old but strong, and the work was slow. Each cut took effort. Each sound made Dylan worry the horse would panic. He spoke softly the whole time, steady and calm, telling the horse about the pasture, the barn, the stream that ran behind the ranch. Bit by bit, the chains fell away. When the last one hit the ground, Goliath stayed still. Then, with great effort, he tried to rise. His legs shook and failed. He rested, then tried again. This time he stood, swaying but free. Instead of running, Goliath stepped toward Dylan. Dylan raised his hand. The horse lowered his head and allowed the touch. And in that quiet clearing, Dylan realized his life was no longer his own. The walk back to the Whitmore Ranch was slow and painful. What should have taken minutes stretched into hours. Goliath moved only a few steps at a time before his legs trembled and forced him to stop. Each breath came hard, steaming in the cold air. Dylan stayed close, one hand near the horse's shoulder, talking softly, guiding him forward whenever he could. More than once, Dylan wondered if he was leading the great animal to die somewhere more comfortable. But every time Goliath stumbled, he lifted his head and looked at Dylan with those steady amber eyes, then pushed on again. That quiet determination kept Dylan moving when doubt tried to creep in. When they finally broke through the tree line and the ranch came into view, something changed in Goliath. His ears lifted, his head rose a little higher. It was as if he understood that this place meant safety. The old barn had not held a horse in years. Broken boards gaped like missing teeth, and the stalls were filled with dust and spiderwebs. Dylan worked until his hands ached, patching walls, spreading fresh straw, and dragging water buckets from the pump. Goliath stood nearby, watching every movement with calm attention, never pushing, never spooking. That evening, Benjamin Whitmore returned from town and froze at the barn door. The old rancher stared at the massive black horse, standing quietly in the dim light. "Where did that come from?" Benjamin asked, his voice low. Dylan told him everything: the chains, the note, the decision he could not walk away from. Benjamin listened without interrupting. When Dylan finished, the old man stepped forward and laid a careful hand on Goliath's neck. His weathered face softened. "This horse is something rare," Benjamin said, "but rare things come with heavy cost." Dylan nodded. He already knew that. The next few days were hard. The local veterinarian, Dr. Patricia Vance, came out and did not hide the truth. Goliath was badly malnourished. His wounds were infected. His body was weak from long neglect. "This will take time," she said, "and there are no promises." Still, she noticed something unusual. Goliath stood quietly for every examination. He did not pull away or show fear. He seemed to understand help when it came. Dylan built his days around the horse: small feedings at dawn, slow walks through the pasture, careful cleaning of wounds in the afternoon. He talked constantly, not because he expected answers, but because silence felt wrong. Goliath listened, always. Slowly, signs of change appeared. The sharp lines of Goliath's ribs softened. His breathing grew steadier. His coat darkened and began to shine in the sunlight. The scars remained, but the pain faded. Then came something Dylan never expected. One morning, Goliath trotted across the pasture, head high, tail lifted. It was not fear or panic. It was joy. Dylan stood frozen, tears burning his eyes as he watched the great horse move with power and grace. Word spread fast in Copper Ridge. People began driving by the ranch just to catch a glimpse. Some stopped. Some asked questions. A few asked permission to meet the horse. A quiet little girl named Lisa came with her mother one afternoon. She barely spoke and kept her eyes on the ground. Goliath walked to the fence on his own and lowered his head to her level. The girl reached out and touched his nose. Something shifted in her face. She smiled. She came back the next week. And the next. A teenage boy with anger in his eyes began showing up after school, asking for work. Dylan put him to work fixing fences and cleaning stalls. The boy stayed. He changed. People did not just see a horse, they felt something. Dylan felt it too. For the first time in years, he woke up with purpose. The fear that had followed him for so long loosened its grip. He was still poor. The work was still hard, but he was not empty anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land gold, Dylan leaned against the fence and watched Goliath graze. The great horse lifted his head and looked back at him. Dylan smiled without realizing it. Whatever Goliath was meant to be, whatever had brought him to that tree, Dylan knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. By spring, Copper Ridge was no longer the same place it had been before Goliath arrived. The ranch that once felt tired and forgotten now carried a quiet energy. Cars appeared on the dirt road almost every day. Families, teenagers, old men who had not spoken much in years. They came with different stories, different wounds, but all of them left changed in small, visible ways. Goliath met each person as if he understood exactly what they needed. He stood still for frightened children. He lowered his great head for people who carried grief. He stayed close to those who felt lost, never crowding, never turning away. Dylan watched it happen again and again, unable to explain it but unable to deny it either. The horse that had once been chained and abandoned now moved with calm purpose. The change in Dylan was just as clear. He spoke more. He laughed more. The quiet man who once avoided people now found himself answering questions, offering help, and guiding visitors around the pasture. The town noticed. Benjamin Whitmore noticed most of all. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Goliath graze under a burning orange sky, Benjamin spoke. "You didn't just save a horse," he said. "You gave this place a reason to breathe again." The real turning point came in early summer. A family arrived with their 12-year-old son, Kevin, who used a wheelchair. The boy's eyes lit up when he saw Goliath, but his parents kept their expectations low. They only wanted him to have a good day. Goliath walked straight to the fence and stood there, quiet and focused. He lowered himself to the ground without being asked. Dylan felt his breath catch. With help, Kevin climbed onto Goliath's broad back. The horse did not move until the boy was settled. Then, slowly and carefully, Goliath stood. The moment Kevin realized he was riding, laughter burst from him like it had been waiting years to escape. Goliath walked gentle circles through the pasture, steady and sure. Grown men cried that day. Dylan did too. That night, Dylan knew things could not stay the same. What was happening at the ranch was bigger than chance, bigger than kindness alone. With Benjamin's support, Dylan made a decision that scared him more than anything ever had. He would build something real, something lasting. The Goliath Recovery Ranch was born before the year ended. Land was donated. Neighbors volunteered. Local businesses gave what they could. Word spread far beyond Copper Ridge. Horses were added carefully. Programs were shaped slowly. But Goliath remained at the center of everything. Years passed. Children found their voices. Veterans found sleep. Families found hope. Dylan found himself. 5 years after that frostbitten morning, Dylan stood in the barn watching Goliath rest his head gently in the lap of a young girl who had not spoken since witnessing violence. She whispered to him freely, her hands buried in his mane. Dr. Vance stood beside Dylan, older now, smiling softly. "He's healthy," she said. "Stronger than most horses his age. And happier." Dylan nodded. He already knew. That night, after the lights were off and the ranch fell quiet, Dylan walked to the pasture gate. Goliath was waiting, as he always did. The great horse pressed his head against Dylan's shoulder. 5 years ago, Dylan had been a broken man with nothing to offer. Now, he stood in a place built on healing, purpose, and trust. "Thank you," Dylan whispered. Goliath breathed out softly, warm and steady. Under the wide Montana sky, man and horse stood together, no longer rescued or rescuer, but partners who had turned pain into something beautiful.